Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfic. This will be the continuation of Swallow the Stars. This will be part 21, chapter 21, entitled The Recommendation Exam. The moment Izuku steps onto UA's campus, all of the nerves that had been eating at him since he woke up just vanish. He'd hardly been able to choke down breakfast, hadn't felt much like talking, and the motion of the train had made him nauseous, but UA has been a safe haven for Izuku since Aizawa took him in, and it's hard to be nervous when he's staring straight at a future he'd never even dreamed of as a kid. "You okay?" Aizawa asks as they walk up the path to the main building. As Izuku's sponsor, Aizawa has to be here with him, but Izuku thinks he would have come along anyway. Izuku nods, and for the first time all morning he smiles. "I am now. Yeah." They walk side by side into UA's main building, passing by faculty members who are here to facilitate and observe the exam, most of whom recognize Izuku and greet him with a smile or a wave and a quick hello. There are a few scattered kids, with their sponsors in the halls, but all of them keep to themselves. The first part of the exam is the written portion, and it's apparently taking place in a normal classroom. "Aren't there more kids applying?" Izuku asks quietly as he and Aizawa lean against the wall outside the room. Aizawa shakes his head slowly and pulls on his capture weapon. He decided to come in his hero costume today, while Izuku is dressed in his nicest pair of jeans and a plain blue t-shirt with a button down over his shoulders, sleeves rolled up just below his elbow. The jacket he'd been wearing is now hooked through his elbow. He has no sense of fashion, but it's the outfit Hitoshi had chosen for him last night, so he assumes it looks good. "There are only 15 recommendation spots open, and only a maximum of 4 students get picked from that pool," Aizawa explains. "Some years, those spots have been completely filled, and other years there haven't been any students who make it through on recommendation." If anything is going to make Izuku nervous now, it should be that statement, but he's fine. Amahaki is calm and placid in his chest. Izuku's new gloves are a comfortable tension over his hands, and he knows he's smart enough to pass the written portion of the exam. All he needs to do is prove to the panel of judges, members of UA's board of directors, if he remembers correctly, that his quirk is impressive enough to warrant skipping past the normal exam. There's a commotion down the hall, and Izuku turns to watch as the number 2 pro hero, holy fuck, rounds the corner with a boy that can only be his son following in his wake. Endeavor is intimidating even from this distance, and he does keep his distance, stopping as soon as he's within view of the classroom and the gathered students and sponsors. But it's not awe that curls in Izuku's gut. It's distaste. "I don't like him," Izuku says, voice still low so that only Aizawa can hear him. "Have you read his rescue statistics? Almost 0. And he causes more property damage and civilian hospitalizations than the rest of the top 10 combined." His eyes move to the boy standing beside Endeavor, taking in his blank expression and the stiff way he holds himself. He's not looking at his father, nor at his competitors. He's just staring at the wall across the hall from him, hardly blinking. Something about that doesn't sit right with Izuku, but he doesn't have long to ponder it. The door of the classroom opens, and Nezu steps out. His eyes glitter when he sees Izuku, but he otherwise doesn't give any show of recognition. "UA hopefuls," he calls, and all of the gathered people in the hall, 30 of them in total, including Izuku and Aizawa, turn their attention toward him. "The written exam is about to begin. Students, please come inside. Sponsors, feel free to wait out here or direct yourselves to the teacher's lounge to wait. Cementos can show you the way." The hero in question waves from down the hall. After receiving a good luck pat on the shoulder from Aizawa, Izuku's the first into the classroom. He takes a seat in the front, more than used to being exposed like this after nearly a year spent in the front corner desk while homeschooling at UA. The other students file in after him, spreading out around the room instead of sitting in a neat row, which is dumb, in Izuku's opinion, but he keeps his thoughts to himself. Nezu closes the door after the last student enters, and he immediately takes a stack of papers and a bundle of mechanical pencils off of the front podium and passes them out. "You have 2 hours to take the test. Your time starts now." It does not take Izuku the full 2 hours to take the test. It's mostly comprised of normal school questions, a good mix of subjects, and a section requiring answers in English. There's also a section, to Izuku's surprise, on hero laws. When Aizawa had given them that book to read years ago, Izuku had known that its only purpose was to cement in his head just how far he could push a destructive power like Amahaki's before he crossed a line that was encased in law. Now he's thankful to have read it for a different reason. At about the 70-minute mark, Izuku sets down his pencil and closes his test. When Nezu catches his eye, he beckons Izuku forward with a wave of his paw, so Izuku stands, pencil and test in hand, and walks to the front of the room. "Are you finished?" Nezu asks, a pleased grin on his face. Izuku likes Nezu a lot because, despite how manipulative he could be, he's always gone out of his way to be kind and compassionate to Izuku. They have similar backgrounds, after all. And it's nice to know that someone understands without explanation just how fucking awful it is to be a living experiment. He nods and hands over the test. Do I have to wait in here? Of course not. You may join your sponsor wherever he wandered off to. Nezu sets Izuku's pencil aside, starts flipping through the test. Taking that as a dismissal, Izuku turns away and walks out of the room. He's fully prepared to walk to the teacher's lounge, so when he steps out and finds Aizawa seated on the floor across from the door, he locks himself in place as surprise sweeps through him. Have you been here the whole time? He asks after the door is closed behind him. Aizawa looks up, blinking slowly at him before shaking his head. I left for a little while to get some coffee, but I had a feeling you'd be done early. He looks Izuku over as he gets to his feet and tilts his head in invitation before he takes a step down the hall. Not this early, though. Was the test that easy? Izuku shrugs and falls into step beside his dad as they leave the classroom behind. He has no idea where they're going, but anywhere's better than just sitting in the hall. A lot of it was just school stuff. Sure, it was a little advanced, but he shrugs again, feeling like he's bragging just because he didn't struggle on it, not really liking the taste of that emotion in his mouth. Pride is not something he usually holds for himself. I don't know. Maybe I rushed through it and I'll get a bunch of points deducted, but a lot of it just seemed like common sense. The hero law questions didn't trip me up either, and I think that's where a lot of the students are going to spend most of their time and lose most of their points. Yeah, that's usually what happens. Aizawa agrees as he pushes his way into the teacher's lounge, past all of the gathered sponsors, including a glaring Endeavor, and into his own office. Izuku closes the door behind him and sags into it. I think Endeavor hates me now, he whispers, and while he's mostly kidding, he wouldn't be surprised at all if the number 2 hero decides to hold a grudge against Izuku for the rest of his life, just because he's the first student to finish the written exam. Aizawa looks up at him after he's sitting in his chair. If he fucks with you, no one will ever find his body. It's not necessarily the promise that settles Izuku into a relaxed smile, though that helps. It's instead the fact that Aizawa doesn't hesitate at all to protect Izuku. From anyone, clearly, if he's willing to go up against the number 2 hero. I think you could beat him, Izuku says honestly, as he walks away from the door to perch in a chair across from Aizawa. You only think so. Aizawa clicks his tongue. Such a winning show of confidence. Izuku's smile turns into a grin that he knows looks like Aizawa's because both Hisashi and Itoshi have told him so. Well, he is a daylight hero. The vultures will be against you. Aizawa waves his hand dismissively. I'd figure it out, with or without the press. I know you would. Just before the end of the 2 hours, Aizawa and Izuku walk out of Aizawa's office and join the rest of the sponsors in the main area of the teacher's lounge. Most of the students have joined by now, but it does take until after the 2-hour time limit before everyone, including Nezu, are gathered together again. Excellent, Nezu says, clapping his paws together. His smile is polite and pleased, but his eyes are calculating. Izuku thinks that Nezu already knows which students will be accepted on recommendation, even without the physical displays of their quirks. All of you have finished your written exams. Congratulations. Now it is time for the practical. Please follow me. Sponsors, I ask that you go with Cementos once more. You will be escorted to a viewing area. Before they're separated, Aizawa leans down to whisper in Izuku's ear. Keep your eyes on Inasa and Todoroki. They both have destructive quirks. Shaking out his hands, Izuku forces himself to breathe and give a quick nod before he has to follow Nezu out of the door. Now that his attention has been brought to 2 of the students around him, it's difficult to not pay attention to them. Inasa is loud, boisterous, happy-looking guy who seems to be trying to make friends with everyone around him. Izuku stays away from him for that reason alone, because he doesn't want to put any more attention on himself before he's able to showcase his quirk, and he'd already done a fantastic job of making himself a target when he finished the written exam so early. He looks strong physically, bulky in the shoulders, almost to the point of appearing top-heavy, and Izuku wonders if he knows what to do with that muscle in a fight or if it's just for appearances. Maybe he has a strength quirk. Todoroki Shoto is the exact opposite. Like Izuku, he's found himself a solitary placement among the group of students, self-isolating and avoiding making eye contact with anyone. He's one of the taller students, though not nearly as tall as Inasa, and he's also rather slender. Izuku doesn't doubt that he can fight. There is no way that someone like Endeavor would bring his son forward to recommendations if he wasn't well-rounded, but Izuku does wonder just how far he's pushed his strength. Does he know how to end a fight without his quirk? Which, speaking of, it's easy to tell what Todoroki's quirk is, even without the whispers of the students around him. He's perfectly split down the middle, from his hair to his eyes, to the scar on his face. White and gray for ice, red and blue for fire. Soon enough, Izuku finds himself standing in front of a tall cement wall, no doubt the work of Cementos himself, with an open door wide enough for 6 people to walk through, shoulder to shoulder, comfortably. Hisashi, no, Present Mike, he reminds himself, is standing inside the threshold of the doorway, big smile in place as he opens his arms to greet the cluster of students. Welcome to the practical exam, listeners. His quirk is on, voice loud enough to be heard by all the gathered students as well as their sponsors, wherever they are. Today you're going to be showing off by competing in a short obstacle course. Nothing too challenging, certainly nothing to the extent of the sports festival, but I have hopes that you will all be able to show off what makes you special here today. Present Mike starts to detail the rules, things like no fighting your opponents and no putting yourselves at risk. And Izuku follows it all away. He touches his fingertips to his thumbs, from index to little finger and back again, over and over until he loses himself in the rhythm. Amahaki thrums under his skin, shifting around his ribs and up in his arms. Clear preparation for what they're about to do. We're going to randomly split you into 5 groups of 3, Present Mike announces, his usual energetic nature magnified to fit his hero persona. Keep in mind that this is a race, but not necessarily against the people that you're running against. Hindering the course for students on your team won't necessarily get you better results, nor will stopping your race mates from being able to complete the course. You're mostly competing against the clock here, and, he says with a wink, proving yourselves to all the old people watching. Does that include you, Present Mike? Izuku asks, not really raising his voice, but still finding the comment loud enough to carry. Some of the students around him laugh, and when Izuku glances at them, he sees their shoulders relax and their faces become less stiff, though it's a nice side effect. He didn't make the comment for their benefit. He's just looking for some reassurance from his dad, and when Hizashi laughs, Izuku finds his goal a success. I suppose it does, Present Mike concedes before barreling right along into drawing names from a bowl to divide them up. Izuku ends up in the second-to-last group, which is good for the plan he's forming, though he does feel a bit guilty about it, given that there will be still 3 other students to go after him. Not guilty enough to not go through with it, though. This is to get into UA, and everyone present has a powerful quirk. There's no way that Nezu and Cementos haven't planned around at least parts of the course, not making it through each race in pristine condition. Standing in a cluster with his group, Izuku tunes out their nervous conversation in favor of watching the other groups. There's a tall girl with a high ponytail and engaging in a conversation with her running mates, and Izuku listens in as she talks about how she's unsure if her quirk is really suited for an obstacle course. Across from her is a boy with orange hair, bragging about his uncle on the board of directors, and Izuku can't hide his sneer at the sheer ego coming off the boy in waves. Inasa and Todoroki are racing together in the first group, and Izuku can't deny that he's curious as hell to know who will be the faster of the two. Todoroki plays it right, uses his fire to get high and his ice to gain momentum. He could very quickly gain the upper hand and keep it. Simple science, simple application, simple strategy. That's not how the race plays out at all. Izuku can't see much. They're allowed to gather inside the wall, but the obstacle course is also walled off, though not as intimidatingly as the border, but it becomes very apparent early on that Naorashi Inasa has a wind quirk, one that he can control but not super well. It makes him fast and deadly and dangerous, but fire could be used to create an updraft for Todoroki and a backdraft for Inasa, so at first Izuku thinks that the race will still play out as he thought. Then he starts to see ice form pop up around the corners, clearly mapping out the layout of the race. There's never even a fire, though. Todoroki uses his ice the whole time, and in only a small handful of ways, and he loses. Hizashi announces the winner in the same breath that he announces Endeavor will be descending from the observation deck to help thaw the course, and that the races will resume as soon as possible. When the 3 students return from the finish line, Todoroki is glaring at something in the far distance. Inasa has lost all the joy, and the 3rd student is huddled in on herself, wide-eyed and like she's just seen something terrible. Izuku shouldn't get involved in this, whatever this is, but then again, after meeting Hitoshi, Izuku has gotten much more confident, sticking his nose in places it doesn't belong, and right now, he thinks that if he doesn't do something, there are going to be consequences later. In what way, he can't know for sure. But he's not about to sit still when there's someone who needs a hard shove back to reality. Clenching his fist, Izuku walks right up to Todoroki on the edge of the herd of students, passing a scowling Inasa on the way. Todoroki-kun, he says, stopping a respectful distance away but staring straight at the boy. Todoroki is tense and upset, and his eyes are cold and mean even though he won't look at Izuku head-on. Do you really think you can be worthy of UA if you don't use your full power? What the fu— Todoroki cuts himself off with a scowl. What are you talking about? He's immediately defensive, which doesn't surprise Izuku at all given what he's starting to imagine Todoroki's home life is like. If Endeavor doesn't put in effort to save victims and doesn't care about collateral damage, Izuku feels like it's safe to assume that his family is fair game for cruelty as well. You only used half of your quirk, Izuku points out, not accusatory, but certainly not offhand either. No matter the anger rolling off of Todoroki in waves right now, Izuku knows enough about negative emotions, from the facility, from bullies at school, from sitting with Hitoshi in the middle of the night following a string of bad dreams. to recognize something worse, darker, and lonelier under his expression. Most people, especially kids their ages, probably wouldn't even think to look beneath the haughty anger, but Izuku thinks he has a pretty good idea, vague enough though it is, of what Todoroki's problem is. If you're trying to set yourself apart from your father by not using your fire, of course you're going to fall behind. Todoroki chokes, and for the first time he seems to actually look at Izuku. His eyes are wide and for a split second scared. Then a mask slips over his face. I'm not. How do you? Izuku smiles then, gentle and warm, trying to be everything that was never given to him as a child. Everything he's only recently learned is even possible to have. It seemed like a reasonable assumption, he says. I don't know what your story is, Todoroki-kun, and I'm not asking for you to tell me if you don't want to. But please don't assume that the rest of us won't try our hardest just because you won't. He gives a bow then, as President Mike announces that the course is all clear and the next group should line up. It was nice to meet you, he says before walking back over to his group. He can feel Todoroki's eyes on him, but that's just fine. Let him watch, honestly. He's not the only kid here with a destructive quirk, not the only kid here who has ghosts breathing down his neck. Izuku's going to show him, show everyone, that fear and power can be harnessed into something heroic. He just hopes that his battle plan is praiseworthy and won't result in some form of scolding from his dad. He's not planning on putting anyone in danger, so it should be fine, but, well, he's just really fucking hoping to get through this and not be on the receiving end of Aizawa's too-knowing stare when he's done. The other teams finish their races in a blur of quirks that Izuku catalogs and stores away to dissect later. The Ponytail Girl has an amazing quirk, and he hopes to be able to tell her at UA. There are a few more pauses while the course gets fixed from quirk misuse or overexertion, but now it's his team's turn. Izuku lines up with the other two students, but while they brace their feet in runner's positions, Izuku just stands there. President Mike drops a flag and yells, "Go!" and his teammates shoot off immediately, disappearing into the concrete maze. Izuku doesn't move. He stays on the starting line, ignoring the murmurs behind him, ignoring President Mike's hesitation, telling him that the race started and he should get going, ignoring the hole that he can feel being bore into his back from what must be Todoroki's glare. He has a plan. He knows what he's doing. The only question is if he can pull it off. Breathing in slowly through his nose and out through his mouth, Izuku starts pulling off his right glove. From watching the other races, especially Todoroki's, since he was kind enough to throw ice up at every turn, Izuku knows the layout of the obstacle course and, more importantly, where the finish line is. It's a zigzagging path with sharp turns, inclines, declines, and various traps that he can't actually see, but there is a straight path separating the starting line from the finish line. Izuku just has to create it. When the glove comes off his hand, Izuku stares at his palm instead of immediately trying to hide it. The black mark sets into his flesh, starts bleeding into a staticky red immediately, like fresh oxygen fanning the heat trapped in a pile of coals. He feels Amahaki rise to the surface, already pooled in his arms. With a gentle nudge from Izuku, the mark in his palm grows and spreads up his forearm, and then past it, to disappear beneath his sleeve. This is the most power he's asked for in a long time, with just one glove off, and Amahaki is right there, right beneath his skin, held in check only by Izuku's nearly 3 years of practice. It's terrifying. It's exhilarating. Izuku takes a step over the starting line, officially beginning the race, but he only takes that one step ahead of him, marked by their shouting and loud quirks. His race mates are leaving the first turn and making their way toward the second, putting them out of the way of the straight path Izuku wants to run. He's already trembling with the effort to maintain the power of Amahaki thrumming just below the surface. He's not tired. He hasn't been working on his stamina for so long for nothing. But Amahaki is ready, and so is Izuku. He lowers his arm to the side, holding his palm open toward the finish line. Amahaki vibrates along his bones, greedy and joyous and hungry. "Okay," he says, voice cast low, because he doesn't want to seem crazy, even though he's obviously talking to himself. Thankfully, President Mike is the only one near enough to hear him. One burst. Just one, nice and easy. Amahaki responds, and the marks dancing along his skin grow brighter and become cold, black static swirling along the edges of the red lines until they look alive. The other students are completely out of the way now, just coming up to the second turn. Izuku curls his outside fingers to the first knuckle and, quickly, throws his arm upward, blasting power out and away from him. Immediately, everything straight in front of him flattens into the ground, and a little further down, under the weight of the black hole that he just threw across the obstacle course. He's very careful not to vaporize anything, but it's far, far too easy to destroy an entire section of the impressively designed course. He refuses to feel bad about it. President Mike had listed all the rules, and not one of them said that any of the obstacles actually had to be crossed, just that quirks could and should be used to get to the end. If anyone in the group had a flight quirk, Todoroki and Inasa could have flown if they'd put any thought into the race outside of competing against each other. Flying over the course would have been the most logical way for them to get to the end. Sure, he had just destroyed the course, but it's probably fine. Thank you. President Mike shouts some commentary, but Izuku isn't listening. He tears off down the new path he made, pulling his glove back on as he goes. His energy's a little worse for wear now that Amahaki had been subdued, but running in a straight line with zero competition to worry about is easier than any of his morning runs, and he crosses the finish line well ahead of the rest of his team. Amahaki is primarily settled along the base of Izuku's spine, like a curled-up cat by the time he makes it back to the cluster of other students who are just staring at him. Feeling quite like he's being examined, Izuku suddenly wonders if maybe he exposed too much of his power, even though he knows that isn't even a reasonable fraction of what the god is capable of. But instead of being put off by what Izuku did, the other students actually seem awestruck once they manage to get words out past their shocked expressions. Not knowing how to handle the sudden attention, Izuku blushes and stammers his way through some sentences that he hopes sounds like gratitude before excusing himself to stand on the sidelines. "Well," President Mike says, voice booming as the other two students join up with everyone else. "It's going to take a short while for Cementos to rebuild the course, so please mingle with each other, make friends. The last group will be able to go shortly, and then we'll be off to the interviews." Izuku smiles at his dad, who gives him a thumbs up in return. "Hey." Izuku turns toward the direction of the nearby voice, and he's surprised to see Todoroki standing next to him. Curious, definitely not wanting to pass up on a conversation with the only other kid who's been blatantly ignoring everyone else all morning, Izuku smiles. "Todoroki-kun." The space between them becomes somewhat dormant, as Todoroki seems to think through his next words, but then he bows, and it's lower than Izuku would have ever expected from anyone. "I'm sorry. I underestimated you." Todoroki-kun, what are you doing? It's fine. I swear it's fine. You don't have to apologize. Please stop apologizing." Izuku is well inside the range of freaking out. He's not used to being so thoroughly apologized to, especially for a slight he wasn't even aware of. Todoroki had underestimated him. That's fine. Izuku has already decided he doesn't want to be an All Might or an Endeavor or a Hawks. He's not looking to be flashy. He's looking to be practical. Todoroki straightens, and he looks nearly as uncomfortable as Izuku feels. "I didn't get your name," he says, sounding angry about it. Izuku starting to wonder if that cold anger is his default, or just brought about by the day's events, and if it's the former, whether the reason for it being there is self-destructive or self-preservative. "Oh, that's easy. Names are something Izuku can do." "Aizawa Izuku," he offers with a nod. "Please, just call me Izuku. Everyone does." "Aizawa?" Todoroki asks, eyes narrowing in thought for a fraction of a second. "Like Class 1A's homeroom teacher, pro-hero Eraserhead? I didn't know he had a son." Izuku honestly can't tell if that's hostility in Todoroki's voice or not. He decides to assume it's not, since Todoroki doesn't seem like the type of boy to keep talking with someone he isn't at least intrigued by. "I'm a fairly new addition," he says. He didn't exactly want to go brandishing my adoption around in case the press caught wind of it. "Oh," Todoroki blinks. "I'm sorry." Now it's Izuku's turn to be confused. "For what? Actually, you know what? It doesn't matter. It's fine. You haven't upset me. I actually appreciate that you made the connection to Eraserhead at all. There are very few people who even know he's even a pro." Todoroki doesn't say anything for a long moment, instead just staring at Izuku, eyes tracking over his face down to his hands and then back up. Izuku's about to open his mouth to say something, anything, when Todoroki beats him to it. "When you get accepted," he starts, eyes somewhere over Izuku's head. "No small number of people are going to claim favoritism. Maybe even some people who are here today." Izuku thinks that Todoroki might be talking about Endeavor, but it could really be any of the gathered sponsors or students. He also feels like he should correct Todoroki and say if he gets in, but maybe doubting himself so openly after everything he said to Todoroki today isn't a good idea. "Until the sports festival," Izuku agrees with a nod. "I don't care what they say. Teachers are allowed to have kids, just like other pro-heroes, and no one on UA's board would ever risk the prestige of their school for nepotism." He smiles, and it feels more fortified than usual. "I'll just deal with the comments until I can show them why I'm here." He holds up a fist, knuckles pointed toward Todoroki. "Let's show them together." Todoroki blinks, clearly startled, as he stares at Izuku's hand, but he does eventually raise his own fist to bump it against Izuku's. "Deal." "Great!" Izuku exclaims, clapping his hands together before fishing around in his pant pocket for his phone. "Now, give me your number. I'm going to add you to my collection of friends. You're my third." All right, everyone. This concludes Chapter 21 of Swallow the Stars. Chapter 22 will be next. I hope you all are still enjoying this fic, and as always, thank you so much for listening.